Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Black Hawk Down, starring Josh Hartnett, Ewan McGregor, Tom Sizemore, Eric Bana, William Fichtner, Ewan Bremner, and Sam Shepard, and directed by Ridley Scott. This is, I think, his first war film that I've seen. I'm not counting Gladiator for sure, or Alien, which Gladiator I'll get to, and Alien I already did, which and he and I'm just gonna say this up front. I have seen this movie before, but I didn't know about this back in the 90s when I was probably small. So let's just get into this movie. And as I did see it when I was like 12, or maybe 13, I forget what age I was, but I was with my parents, just to be fair. So let's get into the movie. This movie is based on actual events set in the early 1990s where a world warlord named Mohammed Farah Aidid causes a war in a deserted country called Somalia. And the movie starts with how it goes in Somalia on Saturday, October 2nd, 1993. And we meet a soldier named Eversman, played by Josh Hartnett, witnessing a slaughter towards civilians in Somalia for food against Aidid, which is fucked up, but hey, he's a warlord. What do you expect? And I just remembered this movie is based on a book. I forget who the author is off the top of my head, but let's just continue. A helicopter with American soldiers arrests one of Aidid's men and can't put him in a federal prison as he's interrogated by Garrison, played by Sam Shepard, as he knows he can't put Aidid in federal prison while he has 300,000 people dead and counting. And this is a very beautiful looking movie, as the director, Ridley Scott, is very good with visuals, but not so good with telling stories at times. Like, I think of his best films like Alien, Blade Runner, which I already got to in the show, and maybe Gladiator, that I have yet to review that film. And the dialogue isn't very well written, as we meet a new soldier named Blackburn, played by Orlando Bloom, as Grimes, played by Ewan McGregor, types his information down, and Blackburn goes with Eversman's group of men, while some American soldiers pick up Hoot, played by Eric Bana, who hunts for animals to cook them so the soldiers can have some meat, And we see Sanderson, played by William Fichtner, McKnight, played by Tom Sizemore, and Beals, played by Mr. Fantastic from Fantastic Four himself, Johan Gruffud, who's let out of the picture after having a seizure in an early scene. And do I care about the soldiers at all? Honestly, I don't know their names, as it took me a trip to IMDb to get their names down. So to be totally honest with you guys, yes and no. As starting with yes is because I want them to survive by the end of the movie, and no because I never get their fucking names until I get to IMDb, as that really annoyed me for half the movie, I must say. They get a mission in a small town in Somalia with the code word Irene, and I unfortunately am sort of connecting with the soldiers. Sort of connecting, I should say. Sort of. As Grimes is about to go into action, as he wants to team up with Eversman, and before they ever go to battle, and the soldiers go get their gear ready to go on a couple of soldiers. Nelson, played by Ewan Bremner, and let me see if I say this name right. Twombly, played by Tom Hardy before he was ever famous, telling Grimes he's not going to need that, and the acting is very well done by the soldiers, sure, as the editing work in this movie is very good in this movie, as which I think it won the best trophy for editing of that year for the Oscars, and the visuals look very beautiful throughout the movie. The soldiers get in a helicopter to go on their mission after a contact in Somalia gets out of the car as he's scared shitless, gives the soldiers a signal to at some soldiers in coming with some military trucks, And Black Hawk helicopters come into Somalia as ID'd soldiers warn him about the soldiers coming in to get to the location. As this is a long, complicated war story that lasts for 2.5 hours as a movie, which makes perfect sense for complicated reasons, as I never watched Band of Brothers, but I hear that's kind of like a little longer and more complicated. And as a movie, which makes perfect sense for complicated reasons, as I'll get further in the war fighting scenes, the Somalian soldiers prepare to run out of the battle as the American soldiers enter the city as Blackburn is killed in action rather too quickly after Orlando Bloom's success with The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, which he was barely in, and I did review that film too. And the Somalian soldiers start firing at the Americans, and they move Blackburn's body out of the action as Hoot has some men and he captured during the mission, and the soldiers can't get the fuck out of there because first they have to get the prisoners back to base. As the soldiers from here of there to there are killed, and do I care? Maybe a little bit. While ID shoots a Black Hawk down, or one of his soldiers, I should say, to the ground, which is why this movie has the title Black Hawk Down in the first place, as it makes perfect sense. The Somalian soldiers fight with the American soldiers, as it'll go on for the day as for the soldiers as in this movie. The battle will take at least 45 minutes to an hour, as my guess, into the movie as women and children fight with the Somalian troops, as it should be illegal, but unfortunately they don't have the same laws they have as they do in America. And I do really like the stakes in this movie as soldier after soldier gets killed, which is the idea to give people war as hell for the entire movie. And if you've seen a war movie during this time, as there were so many coming out by this point, you get the idea of war. A Salmanian kid almost shoots an American soldier, but instead hits one of his own. As I remember someone in the theater saying out loud to the screen, shoot the kid, as I didn't think it was the American way. I still don't believe in shooting any kids as the American way, and this movie does do a good job at believing in that. Meanwhile, the war is still going on during the day, as eventually we'll get to nighttime, but let's stick to what's happening during the day. Some soldiers are wounded versus killed, as we see one guy grabbing a detached hand and puts it in his pocket, which was disturbing, but at the same time, he wants to know who it belongs to, as the movie does a lousy job at the dialogue. And like recently in Tenet, where the fuck is the dialogue? I didn't discover that till I bought Tenet on 4K Blu-ray that it had no dialogue, and that's what this is reminding me of. Where's the goddamn dialogue other than the Sam Shepard scenes? There's dialogue, but does anyone understand what the fuck the soldiers are saying as the war is very realistic? As that's a good thing for a war movie, but one last time, where's the dialogue besides the scenes with Sam Shepard in it? And like recently in Tenet, it was bugging me here as well. One Black Hawk is smoking as it'll tear itself apart and eventually go down to the ground, and the guy driving the helicopter should have put it down earlier instead of crashing, as that bothered me. Some of the American soldiers hide inside a building to hospitalize the wounded while the war is still going on, and some of the soldiers get brought in from base to get the others out of the fighting, and honestly, now it's getting too fucking hard for me to tell the soldiers apart. And that is becoming a real problem for me. Grimes shoots at the badass machine gun on a truck, and Sanderson sees if he's alright as Grimes hears the bells ringing, which was pretty clever, as it's also true in real life. If you blast something, your ears will ring, as it hurts like hell, and I like how that makes sense. The rescue squad makes it to one man in a Black Hawk, and McKnight has some wounded, particularly one that can't see shit. And they get the hell out of there rather too quickly, while Eversman and his group of soldiers are stuck in a building with some wounded soldiers of his own, as it's too dangerous for the Black Hawks to come down and rescue them. And again, the stakes are very well acted by the actors in this movie. Garrison decides to get those who's left behind in to the Pakistani stadium, while a shit ton of Somalian soldiers gain up on a Black Hawk and almost kill a soldier as he's dead anyways, as I would have felt too bad for him. I wouldn't have felt too bad for him if he didn't have a wife who might have an upcoming baby on the way. So I sort of cared at this point, but I can't explain him any further. Evening time comes, and Eversman and his team of soldiers are stuck in this building, and Sanderson and his group of comes to Eversman with the suicide mission as Nelson aims for the roofs, and they come to Eversman's location, except for one man who gets wounded as the Somalian man shoots him in the leg and is wounded pretty damn badly, and they try to send the medic but Garrison can't, because he can't risk another Black Hawk going down, because it's a hot spot when it comes to weapons, which is really risky for Garrison to do nothing in my opinion. Hoot comes to the second crash section, and we see the captured soldier named Durant, or Michael Durant, let me say, who is wounded and interrogated by ID'd, as the government doesn't negotiate with terrorists, as the soldier says, "Michael Durant, we won't leave you behind." The medic gets a bullet out of the wounded soldier and cuts a gut out of the wounded soldier, as the scene was very graphic, sure, but hey, this movie does a good job with making war look like hell, like in Saving Private Ryan did at the beginning of that movie. Grimes makes a cup of Grimes makes a cup of joe for the other soldiers as they start to get attacked by Somalian soldiers, and the American troops fight back. Meanwhile, it's dark, and Hoot has night vision on him to see where to go while attacking some Somalian soldiers to kill them off, and the action is very realistic. Remember, this is based on actual events, for real, and eventually Hoot comes in to help Eversman to help by his side, which is an honorable thing to do, in my opinion. The commanding officers come to save Eversman and other wounded soldiers, as well as his other soldiers, while Garrison wants to know the ETA of the soldiers that were left behind, as he wants them out of there safely and quickly, as the next day comes and Eversman and the live soldiers are running to the Pakistani stadium, as the trucks get out of the city while they run, and the Somalian children and other citizens cheer them out at the war, and they get to the Pakistani stadium with the other wounded soldiers in trucks and are welcomed with water, as they've been through hell, and they luckily get back home alive in order to tell the story as it is today. And the climax was good, as it's very dramatic for a real story. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. The movie does have amazing visuals, as the editing is done right, because it's a complicated war story. There were problems, sure, like making things risky, and the fact that this came out at the same time as 9/11 and other war movies like We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson, or Heart's War with Bruce Willis, as I barely remember both of them, but probably won't watch ever again in my life. Director Ridley Scott does a good job with the adaptation, as the dialogue was overshadowed by some noise like in Tenet. And did I like the characters? Well, kind of. And could I connect with them? No, because it took me a trip to IMDb to know who they are. But it's a good movie overall. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for Black Hawk Down. And until then,